So India apparently on the wrong track. How can that be corrected? And are current efforts enough? I'm joined here in Washington by Tyson Slocum. He's the director of Public Citizens Energy Program. Shweta said, little being done. Three key words there. And critics say that India's historically been very slow when it comes to tackling environmental issues. Would you agree with that?
I would. I mean, the big problem is India just does not have robust access to capital to make all of the clean energy investments that the country needs. They also have a lot of regulatory issues that make investment a little slower in some of these areas. The big challenges in India are with point source emissions, which are smokestacks coming from coal-fired power plants. You've got all the problems with mobile sources from automobiles in the big cities, and then all of the smaller sources to provide cooking and heating in homes. All of that is mainly fueled by wood and dung and other biomass that contains a lot of harmful particulates. So you put all this together, particularly in the winter months, and you've got serious air quality and smog problems throughout India.
Yeah, it sounds like a huge stew that's just being churned. Greenpeace, in their report, they say from 2011 to 2015, China's efforts to reduce pollution were successful. India's smog intensified. And I guess it's all those things you talked about. Were there steps that China took that perhaps India can model as well?
Well, I think the advantages that China has seen, it has just been the fact that they have just much more robust access to capital. And so as a result, you've had a lot of bigger scale investment into clean energy. Obviously, China still has problems with air quality in some of its cities. 1.6 million Chinese died in 2013 due to air quality issues. That number was 1.4 million in India in 2013. Of course, China has a larger population overall, so that number is worse for India. But that's really what it comes down to is how can India more quickly transition to a clean economy? And there are huge barriers to that. The Indian Prime Minister did make a pledge just before the Paris climate talks in December to talk about 100 gigawatts of solar deployment by the year 2022. But when analysts started looking deeply into those numbers, that's going to be a huge challenge. And we just don't see how India can get there without a lot of external financing coming in to help them move forward.
I know you were born in San Diego. I grew up in Southern California, LA. I remember as a kid, the smog, just unbelievable. Of course, there's legendary stories about London and the smog there. What you see with a lot of cities and states and countries is when they start to grow, this is one of the offshoots of this, is that you start to see pollution. And developed countries say, hey, we ought to have or the developing countries say, we ought to have the opportunity to grow in much the same way. I want to play something for you on this topic. It's from the CEO of the Council of Energy, Environment, and Water.
And what's needed for economic growth? You need healthy kids, and you need educated kids. And if these kids are not going to be breathing healthy air, or in their trips to school, they're going to be exposed to severe doses of air contaminants, we are jeopardizing our future.
And I think you'd agree with that. But there is this balance, the economic growth and the environment.
Absolutely. In the United States, we had huge air pollution problems, and that catalyzed huge political support for the Clean Air Act in 1970. And later, there were huge amendments spearheaded by a Republican president, George Herbert Walker Bush, in 1992 to deal with acid rain. And so in both of these instances, America recognized that economic growth was challenged because of our air quality problems and other pollution. And so we had to enact strong air quality regulations. The question is, can India do this? And that's why I think during the Paris climate talks, India did release $500 million into the Green Energy Fund, which is the big financing vehicle that India and other developing countries were talking about. Of course, $500 million isn't going to get us to where we need to go, but it did demonstrate that the United States, under the Obama administration, is committed to taking those first steps to addressing the financing problems as well as curtailing emission growth around the world.
500 million, it's a huge number to us, but it's a drop in the bucket when you start talking about issues like this.
Right.
Thanks so much for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.